Can we take, oh, is that off?
Yeah.
Oh,
Did you
good.
need it?
No, I don't need it. I'm going both low-tech and high-tech at the same time. I have my laptop for notes, but I don't have a PowerPoint, so there you go. Thank you very much, Valerie, and thank you also to OCOW and to all of the organizers of this event. What a great event. And yeah, so as the last speaker on this last day of this pretty amazing forum, it seems I've been kind of given an opportunity to have a bit of a last word of sorts, which kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies, and I'm not loving that as an option, but I'm going to do my best. So I'm going to have your help in the process. That's my plan. So, this is, I think, really actually far from the last word on these vital issues we've talked about in the last couple of days. And it's indeed forums such as these that have served to amplify our words, brought together voices of researchers, healthcare practitioners, community organizations, immigration service providers, government, legal migrant workers, or legal groups, lawyers, migrant workers, and everyone's come together to share, inform, and challenge, and hold to account. And indeed, this third forum, I think, has been part of a much larger trajectory that many of us have been engaged in for a number of years. And there's been significant inroads made towards realizing change, getting stakeholders together, shifting discourses, sharing ideas and practices that address the issues faced by migrant workers, which is interesting to see that at this forum I think it's evident that we've started to recognize that the complexities and the issues that are faced by migrant workers are faced also by so many other vulnerable groups as well, and that the categorizations that we were working with, I think we've started to realize that they were trapping us, and they were trapping us because that's in fact, I think, kind of part of their intention, which I'll come back to in a minute about the categories. So I think we've seen that so many of the issues remain, and one of the benefits of the this fora has been that yesterday and today I think we've seen lots of interesting parallels. You're like, oh, that's the same with home care workers. Oh, that's the same thing happening with this group. And drawing those parallels is a very powerful process to be able to use that evidence to be able to amass and put pressure and make change. And I think we've seen a real impact of this dialogue in the past and today, and the actions of so many beyond this forum. We've seen WSIB changes, partnership between the MLL and MCI, new clinics for migrant workers, community efforts, legal challenges, some that we've won, some that we've lost, but still making them and pulling together the people to make those changes has been, and to make those challenges has been very important. We've seen the creation of the Prevention Office in WSIB, rise in minimum wage, more collaboration and engaged collective action across a whole range of sectors and communities, and so many more that I think Byron earlier noted. And I think the leaders of many of these changes have been here at this forum in Toronto, which has been pretty exciting. And in fact, they've been at past fora as well, which has been particularly beneficial. It's been valuable to see this momentum continue right through. But this momentum and fora such as these are particularly important at this moment in time, and I think Syed's exactly right to kind of point to this moment in time as being particularly important. And I do feel like sometimes we end up saying that at many occasions, but that's good. That means we're paying attention. But I think right now, we have a moment in Canada that we need to seize. We need to directly engage in our cities, in our provinces, and federally. But also I think there's a particularly important moment happening at a global level as well. And this is, states are currently involved in engaging in negotiating the global compacts on migration and on refugees. I have been participating in that all the way along for the last 2 years, year and a half, I guess, it's only been a year and a half, participating in the events, meeting with states, meeting with civil society organizers, with coalitions globally, with Women in Migration Network, with the Global Coalition, on civil society. And what has been interesting to me is that these negotiations, and I'll come back to this in a minute, have really been echoing in my head. And those discussions I've been having and the things I've been hearing have been echoing in my head quite loudly yesterday and today, and I'll come back to that in a second. But the moment in time that is important is that, you know, the global compacts are going to be particularly important because what's happening is at the end of this year, there will be a new global compact on migration that states will have come to agreement on and will work towards implementing. And it's going to set the tone for the next decade around how states govern migration, what mechanisms and accountabilities are there, how they will be implemented and whose interests are served, where resources are allocated. And I think getting health on the agenda now, getting human rights on the agenda is absolutely essential. And but then when I look, so for example, I've looked at all of the documentation as it's coming out and been reading the Global Compact in its various iterations, and states are fighting over wording, which is particularly painful. It's like co-editing a paper with a bunch of countries in a room who then fight about the wording of a document. It's great. But what's interesting, I think, is that in Canada, for example, though being an advocate for issues on gender, for being an advocate for a number of things and an ally in a global level, they, for example, don't even mention health in their own stock taking. They don't even mention the importance of migrant health and protecting the right to health for migrants. So I think we need to be doing more to get that on the agenda of the key negotiators, and not just at that level, obviously, in all of these different fora. Because I think states are using this as an opportunity, or this is a moment in time, and I think we're seeing that this is happening in numerous countries. States are looking for opportunities to shirk human rights obligations, and they're either neglecting or undermining efforts of protecting migrants' health rights. And I think the Global Compact on Migration has been yet another fora where states have been engaged in some of the impressive intellectual gymnastics that Faye Faraday was talking about earlier today with regard to the denial of collective bargaining rights for agricultural workers in Ontario. And I think there's often a kind of sort of disappearing act where important rights are simply just dropped or no longer mentioned. So we need to be paying attention to what's been said and what's not being said. What was in the document is no longer in the document, or in the rhetoric, and is no longer in the rhetoric. And I see this, for example, in the first draft or the zero draft of the Global Compact on Migration, there was more reference to health and in fact a reference to sexual and reproductive health rights. It's now gone. So we flagged that as Women in Migration Network and said, wait a second, we can't drop that. What's happening? Why did they drop that? And the civil society is working together to hold states to account, to not let go of those gains that we've made over the past few decades. There's also, I'm seeing a framing of services rather than that of rights, and I think that there's some interesting tensions there that we have started in this fora to also think collectively about. It's not really about service provision, even though we might use the language sometimes of talking about healthcare services. It really is fundamentally about health rights and the right to health for all. And using the language of services gives states the opportunity to say, oh, we can't afford to provide services for all of those people, so we're going to differentiate access to services based on different types of status. And oh, look, all of those people are non-citizens, so we're only citizens can we afford to give these full services to. And then you get that situation where suddenly it's more and more important that these people can't get access to citizenship. That means they can't get access to the services, but actually what it is a way of avoiding providing and living up to essential their human rights obligations. I raise some of these things here because I want to underscore the importance of the key themes and recurrent tensions and ideas that have been discussed in this forum over the last couple of days. And as I said, I felt like they've been echoing across time and geography, levels, silos, sectors, and networks. And funny, yesterday and today, I think actually yesterday I was on the phone in the morning with a call with the Women in Migration Network, and there was a discussion there about how we can make sure that we aren't perpetuating a kind of thinking that is a tendency to construct migrants as vulnerable subjects. And I was like, oh, that's the same conversation I just had this afternoon in another conference, in this very conference. And so those same discussions, those same issues are resonating globally. It's also become, I think, painfully clear how such powerful structural factors are at work here. We've got globalization, capitalism, imperialism, and we have all these sort of historical underpinnings of the intersecting precarities and vulnerabilities we have been talking about in this forum, and that these are global trends. But being global and structural doesn't make them beyond challenge. As I really got a good laugh today when Faye was basically said that she was accused of trying to take on or challenge capitalism. And she said, yeah, that's the point. And we do that in a variety of different ways. And because capitalism is not just this thing, it's made up of a bunch of laws and a bunch of practices and a bunch of agreed upon norms and accepted ways of doing things. And so that is where we need to aim our efforts, even though sometimes we don't get up in the morning on our way to work and think, I'm going to take down capitalism today. But in many ways, well, you might, but in many ways, we are all engaged in that process. But it's funny that these are these sort of structural tensions, right? And this is one of the things that I think came up over the last couple of days as well, is that there's a lot of debate around structural and individual tensions, right? There are these, structural causes, and we talk about the structural causes, and then we often look to the individual to solve the structural causes. So we say things like, well, here are all these big structural problems, we can't tackle them because they're structural, so instead we're going to make sure there's a 1-800 number for individuals to call to be able to refuse unsafe work. But we're not going to address any of the sort of larger structural factors that leave them in positions where they really have very few options to do so and risk their employment, both present and future, to do so, and many other types of reprisal in their status. I think that we have discussed in a much more nuanced way around those kinds of discussions around thinking about the structural and the individual level. I think we've recognized that individuals have great power and can do both harm and good. And the narrative around the one great employer or the one bad apple is still there, despite the last 15 years of me saying it's, and all of us saying it's not a bunch of bad apples, it's not one bad apple, it's the system, it's the structure, but those tensions are still present, and I think it's something that we're getting better at tackling and navigating, and I've been quite impressed with the nuance that I've been hearing. I think too, we've also talked a lot about the way in which the structural factors create the conditions of vulnerability, that it's not that migrants themselves are inherently vulnerable, that this has also been important, and to understand how these things intersect, how the structures and the construction of vulnerability through discourse, bureaucracy, and policy, everything from the language used in immigration systems to WSIB systems that reinforce and deny worker advocacy and reaffirm assumptions that workers themselves need protecting rather than rights. And we've seen this kind of paternalism, I think, and we've recognized, I think, the way in which the internalism is entwined with immigration and legal systems. And I think we see it manifest in a whole bunch of different ways, and in particular through that kind of normalization of the employer control, for example, in the SOP as one example. And I think with immigration governance, this has often been the case that there are, that embedded into the immigration system are so many structural factors that I think we sometimes, our starting point is, the arrival, that the newcomer is here, and then we work with that to try to find ways to help the person be able to access their rights and access justice and access health. But I think recognizing that that both gender and racial inequality are drivers of, as well as outcomes of, the ways in which we have governed migration in this country and worldwide. And so understanding that as a starting point means that we recognize that the kinds of solutions we might offer on the day-to-day that are actually extremely meaningful, that might save lives, are in and of themselves not sufficient to get us off the treadmill. And we need to find ways to bring those together. So we know that we must challenge the isms, and I think the fora such as these can enable us to share ideas and strategies. And I think it allows us to move away from a kind of unidirectional thinking, one where knowledge transfer is the norm, and instead thinking more about knowledge transformation. And I think that we've really seen that happen, and we've been part of that process. And in fact, I think we need to continue to think creatively and collaboratively, and not be daunted by the complexity of the structural and the individual level realities. And I think also, earlier today, Chris was basically talking about a different vision. And I think a different vision is not going to come from, the top down, it's not going to come from the bottom up, it's going to come through process, through dialogue, through change, through transformation. It comes from moments, a sort of all of the moments coming together and coalescing to allow us to actually transform our thinking and transform our knowledge and transform the systems that go with it. And so that's being here and being part of this is so powerful and so meaningful for all of us, because we're actually engaged in all of this transformation at the fore. And I also think we should remember that we're not alone and working in silos. We're part of a much larger global struggle. And I don't want us to leave being daunted by the Tower of Isms. So because I definitely don't want the last word, I want to call on you. I want to hear and ask for you to share some of the innovations, changes, and ideas moving forward that you've heard over the last 2 days, so that we can continue with our momentum towards knowledge transformation. So, I want to actually hear from you. I want us to share. I don't want to have this end with just me, the talking head end. I want us to end on actual positive things that we've heard, things that will help us move forward, that I think will set the tone not just for next year's forum, probably too soon to start thinking about, I understand, Valerie. Should I call for volunteers now for co-organizing? Who else wants to help organize next year? And so let's do it. I want to hear shout-outs. I want people just to, if they're comfortable and can project, say something from your seat. If not, go to the microphone. Give me one good solid example of something that you've thought was absolutely going to be, is part of this sort of rolling ball of great initiatives that are emerging, that are actually part of this whole type of knowledge transformation we're talking about. Any ideas that you want to share from the last 2 days? Anybody? Horatio.
Hi, everyone. Well, I would like to say that I feel very happy to attend this incredible forum, and because it was a space where we could share ideas, concernings, and information. So it will be really exciting to have again this kind of event, maybe next year or even earlier, and
or even
hopefully with some results or implementations of the topics already exposed here.
Okay.
So yeah, thanks again to the organizers and the speakers who made this possible.
Cool.
Everything possible. Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you, Horatio.
One.
You might have to go to the mic.
No, it's okay.
Hold on, I'll get you a mic.
Oh, thanks. Look at that. Technological solution.
You want everybody.
Yeah, we gotta hear what you're saying.
I think that this is a great event because I am a daughter of a
temporary worker from Mexico, and I see that the government of Canada see some problems, and research, and not only research, are helping to resolve these problems. It's grateful for me now that the migrant workers from all over the world, there are support here, and yes, there are problems, but you can find solutions. It's great.
Thanks, Shirley. Fantastic. Anybody else? Come on, you guys, you can't be asleep. It's not the second day of an intense workshop for 2 full days. Oh, okay, we'll go here and then go.
Okay.
Ooh, that works.
I want to share something with you. I came from Mexico City. I am a researcher in International Migration Research Center with Dr. Regina Henry in Waterloo. I read quickly. In Mexico are 120 million people, and 40 million of them are poor people. 40 million people is the entire population of Canada. So the entire population of Canada is the poor people that are in Mexico. And why is that? The truth is public policy in Mexico are not pretty good. I don't like public policy in my country, and I think this program of temporary farm workers helps ensure complete families that in Mexico the wages are very low compared with Canada. So when they come here and they win more, so it's very helpful for them. Okay, one of the most important points of renegotiation of NAFTA, North America Free Trade Agreement, is to get higher wages for Mexico. But while it happens, we should do the possible to send the most possible farm workers from Mexico to Canada to live the experience of working here, while wages are better in Mexico. Thank you for the organization of this forum. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Thank you. As long as they have their human rights protected when they're here. But,
Well, I think the emphasis that Horacio said about implementation and then evaluation of the impacts of that,
Yeah.
to go back to, and actually, the prevention officer today talking about stuff and saying we need to monitor what's happening and we need to evaluate it. We should make sure that that happens more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just our responsibility as researchers, it's the state, it's the provincial organizations and the organization's responsibility to evaluate the impact of, as he said, these are all great initiatives, but what happens on the ground?
Yeah.
And I think we should go with that.
yeah, and another echo, just last week or 2 weeks ago in New York, it was said by the Canadian representative, what gets measured is what gets done. And absolutely, implementation and measurement is going to be powerful for us. Nelson?
Yeah, well, kind of on the same lines. Well, from my own research, it was very quantitative, and my experience in my research was there is significant lack of quantitative research
Yeah.
on this topic. So I hope there's continuation. This work I did was part of my doctorate, but so I hope more quantitative research continues to be developed because, as you said, unfortunately, what is measured is what is done.
Yeah.
And it's not that qualitative is not valid and it's not implemented. It is, but I think we need to pay attention to quantitative significantly.
Anybody else?
Mike here.
Oh, you
Okay, so I just want to say, echo the thanks to everyone involved in organizing and hosting this very valuable forum. And for me, one of the key things is just having had the opportunity to connect and develop relationships with others working on these issues in such a range of ways and places, so from researchers to policymakers to service providers, but especially valuable, I think, has been the presence and participation of people with lived experience of migration and the particular subgroups that we've been focusing on. That's just been very, very valuable, so thank you to all of you.
Fantastic.
So yes, again, also I enjoyed a lot of presentations, and from my conversations with people, I missed a lot of good ones too. As many of you probably realized over the last 2 days, domestic work or caregiving work is overly represented with women of color, our migrant workers. And as we've seen, they're largely excluded either formally or substantively from protection through employment legislation or health and safety laws. So I think this would be an interesting time if you would like to do something little to help. Is the International Center for Worker Solidarity is having a campaign right now to have the federal government ratify the ILO Domestic Workers Convention, which was brought into existence in 2011, sets out minimum standards to make domestic work more decent and fair. Importantly, recognizing domestic workers' freedom of association. And as part of that campaign, I have a petition here. So if you would like to come sign, just come talk to me. And we're also looking at to bridge partnerships with organizations in order to get this petition across Canada signed and in front of the government. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. We have maybe time for one more, Valerie?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I am a human rights advocate, and I do some work with clinics in Sincom and Brantford, and I see really close the situation of the temporary workers. The NAFTA has only benefits the United States and Canada, and many people believe that Canada is doing something good, bringing or allowing temporary workers to come to Canada, but this is a different story. Mexico lives now a momentum. We have coming up an election in July, where the government promised to restore all the agricultural land in Mexico to prevent that those people who comes to Canada to do agricultural work, they can do it in Mexico with all the benefits. They don't have to come to suffer in Canada.
Yep.
So what we need to do, besides to make pressure in Canada, now we have to make pressure to the new government in Mexico to accomplish what they promised now, to invest more in agricultural land, to promote more health and benefits and better wages to the Mexican people, so they don't have to come to Canada to suffer what they're suffering here. So I think it will be in our hands now to pressure the Mexican government, the new one, I hope, they elected in July, and so they don't have to come to Canada anymore.
And this is part of what we mean when we say that the system is working to benefit from inequality and perpetuate inequality, not actually necessarily solving it in the long run. And so these four are places for us to share information, exchange ideas, and transform the knowledge so that we move to a situation where we can really demand more of our governments and work together collaboratively. So thank you also. Let's do one last big thank you to the whole organizing team right now. We'll do more. Valerie will come up, but thank you, organizing.